Hello, world and universe. Welcome to the Trevor Donald Experience. Manifest your truth. Well, I got a story for you today that involves the Clintons, Bill and Hillary Clinton, back in the late 70s, early 80s, when Bill Clinton was the governor of Arkansas between the times of 1979 and 1981 and 1983 to 1992. And the proverbial question back then was, did the Clintons have slaves? And that answer to that proverbial question would be yes. During Bill Clinton's time as governor of Arkansas, the governor's mansion did use prison inmates as domestic workers. They were cooking, cleaning, gardening, and serving. This was a long-standing Arkansas tradition that predated the Clintons and continued under their tenure. And so this has to deal with the 13th Amendment. This practice was in many states, remains legal under the 13th Amendment of the United States Constitution, which abolished slavery, except as punishment for a crime. So you go to prison, you can do free labor as an inmate and not get paid for it. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist in the United States. So if you get convicted and go to prison, especially in the southern states, they can order you to do free labor, which would be considered in today's time slavery. And so let's get into the story how the Clintons had mostly black inmates working at the governor's mansion. So let's get into the story. Contrary to popular understanding, the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution did not prohibit slavery. The text makes it clear. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. The nifty little loophole of that word except means that slavery isn't actually banned outright. Someone simply has to be convicted of a crime in order to be enslaved today. This gave southern states a welcome free hand in reestablishing forced servitude for African Americans in the years after Reconstruction collapsed. As Douglas Blackmun documents in his book, Slavery by Another Name, the Jim Crow era was in many places characterized by a mass re-enslavement process, whereby criminal laws were devised that allowed states and municipalities to put black people in chains again. Today, forced labor among African Americans persists. In Louisiana, for example, we're talking even today, felons are sentenced to hard labor as well as prison time, and inmates at the infamous Angola prison still pick cotton at gunpoint today. The prison labor system in the United States has long been an unacknowledged scandal. It's quite plainly a form of slavery right in your face. You're forced to work for being convicted of a crime, that isn't slavery. It says that slavery is legal if it is imposed as part of a conviction for a crime. All manner of people benefit from the system. As Mother Jones has reported, Congress actually incentivized private companies to use inmate labor, and the incarcerated now produce everything from bedding to eyeglasses. They even staff call centers with a company called Unicor, UNICOR, encouraging companies to smart source their call center work to prisoners rather than sending it overseas. This is happening even to this day. But two possible unexpected beneficiaries of the contemporary prison slavery system were none other than Bill and Hillary Clinton, your great famous Democrats, who during their time at the Arkansas governor's mansion in the 1980s used inmates to perform various household task in order to keep costs down. Hillary Clinton even wrote of the practice openly and without any apparent sense of moral conflict. The Clintons' practice has gotten some renewed attention over the last day with the rediscovery of the relevant passage from It Takes a Village. She said, as Super Predator, Bill Clinton's Use and Abuse of Black America. That is a book. Super Predator, Bill Clinton's Use and Abuse of Black America. And so the Clintons was, however, generous enough to allow inmates from Arkansas prison to work as unpaid servants in the governor's mansion. And It Takes a Village. Hillary, in the book, It Takes a Village, Hillary Clinton writes that the residence was staffed with African-American men in their 30s, since using prison labor at the governor's mansion was a long-standing tradition which kept costs down. It is unclear just how to work as maids and gardeners had been at the governor's mansion. But one has no doubt that as the white residents of the mansion staffed with unpaid blacks, the Clintons were continuing a certain historic Southern practice. Hillary Clinton even went so far as to say that she and Bill were sure not to show undue lenience to the slave servants, the black slave servants, writing that they enforced rules strictly and sent back to prison any inmate who broke a rule. This is what Hillary Clinton said. Indeed, is really difficult, given the facts, to conclude that this practice was anything other than slavery. The Clintons were perfectly content to be waited on by black people who received no compensation and would have been pursued and dragged back in chains if they had tried to leave. There was only one word for such an arrangement. One could almost respect the honesty with which Hillary spoke of her use of convict labor. She acknowledged that these men were black and that she had a strict policy of sending them back to prison if they violated any rules. But Hillary Clinton isn't like the Atlantic writer who dwelled on his upbringing as part of a family who held a woman in a state of slavery. Her forthrightness in It Takes a Village is not because she is attempting to grapple with the atrocity in which she was complicit, but because she doesn't see anything wrong with what happened. Whereas many of us would be appalled at the idea of having our meals served by unpaid black servants. Clinton found the whole situation quaintly traditional, especially Hillary Clinton, and was favorably impressed by the financial benefits of not paying her staff. What others might call a crime against humanity, Clinton's referred to it in her book, It Takes a Village, as simply an unusual aspect of living at the governor's mansion. The Clintons' use of prison labor was only one small part of a long and horrifying record. Both Clintons, especially Bill, have consistently manipulated black political interests while showing complete disregard for the humanity of African Americans. This stretches from Hillary's perpetuation of a hideous racist myth about a wave of hyper-violent super predators to Bill's politically motivated execution of a mentally disturbed black inmate when he was the governor. Yes, he had a mentally ill, low IQ black inmate executed when he was the governor of Arkansas. Predictably, when people started to mention how disturbing it was that the Clintons had kept slaves, a few especially committed online, Hillary fans began to issue impossible contorted defenses, including blaming Dub Bros for bringing the matter up and explaining that Hillary had tried to empathize with the convicts. And to see why this defense fails on Hillary Clinton's behalf, simply imagine how laughable they would have seen this to be if applied to any other situation of unpaid black labor. For example, if a 19th century Southerner offered them an unpaid job. But let's also be clear, the issue of prison labor isn't just about the Clintons. I believe the Clintons have an indefensible record of behavior toward black people. But the story of the Clintons in the Arkansas governor's mansion also illustrates how ubiquitous and taken for granted situations of slavery are. It's very easy to think, but that couldn't possibly be slavery. The state is just assigning inmates to an interesting work detail. Yeah, right. Yet, if we examine the facts critically, it's hard to see how it could be anything else but free labor, involuntary servitude, or modern day slavery. Prison labor doesn't seem like slavery because it no longer displays some of the imagery associated with slavery in our minds, such as the whippings and the auction blocks. But we're still dealing with a situation in which people are working by compulsion rather than choice and are threatened with violence if they leave. They are leased to corporations, these prisoners, as if they are property. The auction block may be gone, but the core aspect of slavery is not, and that people are bought and sold. Rather, it's about the kind of dominance that is asserted over these black prisoners. After all, slavery can't exist even if one party has a monopoly on slave owning. It's the forced labor and the experience of the slave that counts, not the trading element. Of course, one could draw a distinction between slavery, in which a person asserts all rights over a human being, including the right to sell them and their children, and the possibility of taking their life, and involuntary servitude, in which a person is simply forced to work, a distinction such as the 13th Amendment contemplates. But involuntary servitude immediately begins to sound like little more than a euphemism for slavery, and many of the situations that modern anti-slavery advocates would consider to be slavery, such as that perpetuated by Alex Tizon's family, do not necessarily include people being murdered and having their children sold, though they sometimes are. It is important never to minimize the distinct horrors of early American slavery. But the term also applies to situations in which the victims are treated comparatively well, and which are not characterized by all of the worst features of the pre-Civil War South. Thus, I do think it's fair to classify prison labor as a form of enslavement. Degrees of force obviously vary, but since the Angola prison plantation today looks exactly the same as it did in the 19th century, I believe the words help us appreciate the evils of mass incarceration rather than diminishing the evils of the antebellum era. In conclusion, the Clinton slavery controversy should not really be about the Clintons. It's the prison labor system as a whole that is rotten. And they were only two especially amoral beneficiaries of it. Today, our attention should be focused on the cotton pickers of Louisiana and the scores of other modern-day slaves. This is not a mere pathology of the Clintons, but a pathology of the country we all inhabit today.